The hard problem of consciousness sounds like the title of a math exam question you skip until the end. Except here, you're the problem. You're the equation trying to solve itself. Science is obsessed with explaining stuff, and we can't help but ask the W questions. The real mystery, though, is not that consciousness exists, but that we keep expecting a third-person science to reveal a first-person fact. This video is not aimed at finding the I, nor it assumes that there is any problem whatsoever. The world we observe is already shaped by the light of experience, so explaining experience by that world becomes a hall of mirrors, said Max Velmans. After 4 decades of research, he gave a speech saying that consciousness studies is a revolutionary field of science that can only be done by an individual, by going within. Our conscious lives are the sea in which we swim. So, it is not surprising that consciousness is difficult to understand. We consciously experience many different things, and we can think about the things that we experience. But it is not so easy to experience or think about consciousness itself. Our understanding of consciousness is also determined by our intellectual history. We are the inheritors of ancient debates. Is the universe composed of one thing, monism, or are there two, dualism? Does the world have an observer-independent existence, realism, or does its existence depend in some way on the operations of our own minds, idealism? Is knowledge of the world public and objective, and knowledge of our own experience private and subjective? If so, how is it possible to establish the study of consciousness as a science? In this video, we will make sure to answer none of those questions. The only problem in the hard problem of consciousness is that the ancient debates we inherited are not that ancient. Most of them are from past centuries. If we go far enough in the past, we will find lots of insights about consciousness. Yogic insights enter this conversation through the concept of awareness, independent of thought flow. This is a concept I want you to remember. There is an awareness that is completely independent of thoughts and states of mind. Yogis describe consciousness as a field that continues through all states, be it waking, dreaming, deep sleep. It is only shifting in density and texture. This framing supports a newer scientific idea. Consciousness may be state invariant while the mind changes its modes. So, based on this insight, deep sleep holds a very faint, content-free luminosity that lots of advanced practitioners can stabilize. Instead of treating sleep as unconsciousness, this model treats it as a different configuration of the same underlying presence. Neuroscientists studying non-REM alpha bursts, extended slow-wave coherence, and high-level integrative signatures during dreamless sleep find surprising evidence for this to be the case. The most intriguing new fascination lays with minimal phenomenal experience. I am talking about those borderline states between wakefulness, sleep, anesthesia, or deep meditation. Those are the states that can teach us a lot about consciousness. Neuroscientists now take seriously the idea consciousness can persist without content. This was previously dismissed as mystical nonsense. In the last decade, consciousness studies has begun mutating into something stranger and more hybrid than the old philosophy of mind debates. The dominant change is a willingness to treat consciousness as a field phenomenon rather than a localized mental spark. The older models assumed a mind sealed inside a skull, or above the skull or around the body. The newer ones treat consciousness as a relational weave, a pattern that crystallizes when biological, informational, and experiential currents intersect, almost like an atmosphere forming around the planet rather than a flame inside a lamp. Yogic traditions long described awareness as a pervasive substratum that saturates experience. They speak of consciousness as a self-stabilizing attractor state in complex systems. Phenomenal binding is the brain's greatest magic trick, and also its biggest unsolved riddle. Imagine you're eating an apple. You see its red color, feel its roundness, taste its sweetness, hear the crunch. Each of these sensations is processed in a different area of your brain. Color in the occipital lobe, texture in the somatosensory cortex, taste in the gustatory cortex, sound in the auditory cortex. And yet, somehow, you don't experience 5 separate data streams. You experience one apple. That seamless unity is phenomenal binding, the mysterious process by which billions of scattered neural firings form a single coherent moment of consciousness. This is where the hard problem of consciousness comes in, because it's about how so many different experiences fuse into a single subjective one. How does electrical noise across your skull become the feeling of you seeing that apple? The philosopher David Chalmers called it the combination problem. If each neuron carries a micro-experience, who or what does the combining? And how do those micro-experiences turn into a unified I? Let's see what happens at microscopic levels. Do these entities also have an I? Protoconsciousness is a term philosophers and cognitive scientists use to describe the simplest forms of awareness that might exist in very basic living systems. Organisms that don't have brains, thoughts, or feelings like we do, but still respond to the world in ways that suggest something like a tiny, minimal experience. Imagine a single-celled organism, like an amoeba. It moves toward food and away from danger and toward food. On the surface, this is just biology. But some philosophers would say, in that movement, there's a proto-level of experience. The organism is sensing its environment in a way that is the most minimal form of awareness. It definitely doesn't reflect on it, but it is interacting with the world in directed, responsive way. That's the essence of proto-consciousness, the smallest spark of something it is like to exist. Think of it as the seed of consciousness. In other words, proto-consciousness doesn't require complexity to exist, but it forms the foundation from which complex awareness grows. Proto-consciousness connects to the hard problem of consciousness by showing that subjective experience can exist in extremely simple systems. The hard problem asks why and how physical processes produce experience. Proto-consciousness suggests that experience may emerge gradually, starting in minimal forms long before complex brains exist. In other words, the something it is like that puzzles us in humans might have its roots in these tiniest sparks of awareness. So, even simple organisms might contain faint glimmers of presence, creating a cosmos textured with degrees of awakening rather than clean divisions between conscious and non-conscious. Now imagine consciousness as a beam of light. When that beam tightens and locks onto a single object, it becomes saturated with intentionality. You're completely about what you're thinking. That's what happens in deep attention, meditation, love, or obsession. Consciousness becomes thick with its own focus. At high saturation, your experience feels rich, very immediate and alive. At low saturation, it feels thin and ghostly, just like when you scroll aimlessly, half present. Consciousness thrives when it's about something fully, when the world you're attending to fills you up completely. It is being said in consciousness study circles that consciousness often carries maximal intentionality. And by that we mean that consciousness, in waking state, is almost always pointed towards something. All moments of being conscious involve your awareness being about something. An image, a sound, memory, thought, an object in front of you. Unconscious processes, like digestion or reflexes, happen without any aboutness. They just run. But conscious experience is drenched in direction. It's always aiming at something. You see a tree, but then you also experience it as beautiful, lonely, ancient, familiar, and stuff like that. You hear the melody, and then you also feel nostalgia, wonder, maybe some sadness. Consciousness not only observes, it also infuses the world with significance. So, maximal intentionality describes this overflowing quality of awareness. It turns bare phenomena into experiences, facts into meanings, and perception into participation. Consciousness points at reality by touching it and coloring it. Why should physical processing give rise to a rich inner life at all? It seems objectively unreasonable that it should, and yet it does. If any problem qualified as the problem of consciousness, it was this one. But it's no secret that the progress of science is measured by the quality of questions it starts asking. At higher levels of organization, new domains of description arise, and experience may be such a domain. We often like to assess things by its functionality, and that tends to corner our reflections a lot. Consciousness shows itself through functions, but the functions arise from awareness rather than constitute it. In science, especially cognitive science, functionality often serves as the measurement tool. If a system reports information, solves tasks, integrates data, or reacts in flexible ways, researchers call it conscious, or at least conscious-like. Yet this approach evaluates output, not inner presence. The only thing it does is identify the behavioral footprint. Yogic and philosophical traditions place the defining trait elsewhere. They describe consciousness as presence, luminosity, awareness, qualities that exist prior to any function. A rock performs no mental functions. A deep sleep yogi performs no cognitive functions. Yet the yogic insight claims a field of awareness persists in both cases at different intensities, dormant in matter, vivid in trained minds. The defining quality is the capacity to reveal experience. These findings point to the same conclusion. Function expresses consciousness but does not define it. Philosophers call subjective experience the first reality. Experience stands at the entrance of every truth. This entrance earns the name first reality. So, experience yields the universal foundation of all science, which sounds polite until you realize it basically tells every physicist, relax, your equations arrive after the show begins. Merleau-Ponty treats the body as a clever accomplice of consciousness, a partner in crime. The body is our general medium for having a world, he says. The charm of their idea comes from its reversed direction. Instead of claiming that a world produces experience, they claim experience produces a world. This does not mean the universe waits for humans to appear. It means the world as lived, the meaningful world you move through, becomes real only when consciousness organizes raw stimulation into coherent patterns. Your senses receive a flood of signals, light frequencies, some pressure changes, and chemical traces. But these signals carry no inherent shape or meaning. Experience performs the act of organization. It groups colors into objects, movement into intention, sounds into language, sensations into emotions. Through this process, a field of data transforms into a world filled with significance. Consciousness supplies the binding force that turns fragments into wholes. Consciousness behaves like the silent ocean beneath every wave, a vast and luminous field in which all apparent divisions arise and dissolve. Science dissects reality. It is breaking it into molecules, many neurons, easy and complex equations, and endless categories. It maps everything, measures it, and separates, revealing astonishing patterns in isolation. Consciousness, however, holds everything together as a single inseparable field, the scientist and the science.